Every single week, Hamster's Arcade Archives gets a new release of a classic arcade title from ages past, and more often than not, it's a shmup. So what's on tap this week? Is it cool enough to sink more time into? Is it fresh enough to do more than a credit feed? Is it worth our time, or will it end up being forgotten again? Today, we have ZIng Zing Zip from Tecmo and Allumer. Can it prove itself against the myriad titles like it, or be left in the dust? Well, we're going to see exactly what's up in this episode of Bullet Heaven. It's the original.
Let's go!
ZIng Zing Zip was developed by Allumer and published in 1992 by Tecmo. As part of the Arcade Archives line, it would make its way to the PlayStation 4 and Nintendo Switch on September 7th, 2023 from Hamster. As a game that follows closely in Raiden's footsteps, it definitely takes a decidedly tongue-in-cheek approach to differentiate itself, along with a couple of neat wrinkles. Let's take a closer look. I'm all for a decent copy of a great formula, but how does ZIng Zing Zip shake things up? Right from the get-go, it's pretty clear that this is pretty much a through-and-through Raiden clone, albeit with some subtle changes. I mean, it's all here. Just for one, you have your typical weapon system that gets upgraded through color-coded pickups of the same type, but can be switched to others at the current level. However, ZIng Zing Zip adds a fire shot to its arsenal in addition to the established spreading machine guns and straight-line laser. It should also be noted that these weapons also have fewer possible levels to them than Raiden's. Missile sub-weapons are also present, with straight-firing missiles and homing shots, each of which can also be leveled up with repeat pickups of the same type. They can also, as is typical, be switched to another type at the same power level. ZIng Zing Zip adds a neat X-missile pattern, which is handy in taking out enemies at more extreme angles, though homing, I feel, does a better job. ZIng Zing Zip also has a pretty standard bomber, which nullifies enemy attacks, but not necessarily the enemies themselves. Some damage is dealt, but if it's not popcorn, it may not be taken down. This is compounded by a lack of iframes. It makes it rather easy to die just by way of enemy collision in crowded spots. It's not ideal, but on the other side of things, many bombers can be obtained in any given stage, so liberal use is possible. So yeah, it's pretty boilerplate overall. However, ZIng Zing Zip does have one neat quirk, which, while difficult to use consistently, is pretty neat: a rolling maneuver. When moving to the left or right, at which the maximum turn animation displays, moving in the opposite direction and continuing through the turn animation will allow you to perform a full aileron roll, granting super useful iframes and even boosting your firepower up to the next level. This was certainly novel for its time, sure, but since it requires so much space, the roll honestly doesn't feel as if it can be used to its fullest potential like the loops were in 1943. Furthermore, this emphasis on macro dodging feels a little counterintuitive these days, but as a full-fledged so-called dad shmup, it really was the norm back in the day, as it were, so I understand the idea. ZIng Zing Zip has 7 stages, multiple loops, and a pretty daunting difficulty given the limitations behind the bomber and the awkwardness of the eye roll. Easy really isn't that easy, and the only extents after the single one achieved at 300,000 points are from 1-up items. At the very least, there are no checkpoints, so its flow isn't broken up as badly as its source material at death. But could there be anything else? Well, the scoring doesn't do a ton outside of mild meddling and power-up max bonuses. Medals will be dropped by defeating certain enemies that will mount in value with each subsequent one collected, to a maximum of 1,000 points each. Don't worry about collecting them all. If they fall off screen, their value is not reset, but, try to get a whack at them. However, if a life is lost, the medal score will reset. Power-up max is also worth another 5,000 points for both main and sub-weapons, so finding a combo that works, sticking with it, and carefully picking up drops that match what you got is a good idea. Bearing this in mind, the 300,000 point extend score shouldn't be too far out of the question with a bit of memo and dedication, but beyond that, it's all about the leaderboards. As with all Arcade Archive releases, a score attack mode and timed caravan mode is also present, each with their own dedicated leaderboards, lending itself to a decent amount of replay for those that find ZIng Zing Zip to be something up their alley. The timed mode in particular is a great way to compete for score without having to deal with the absurdly difficult later stages in the game, which is good news for more casual players. Of course, because every ACA release has this mode, it's not exactly an advantage for ZIng Zing Zip. I've said it before, and I'll probably say it again, but presentation can really elevate a ho-hum game to great heights if it's of exceptional quality. But the presentation in ZIng Zing Zip is a little on the confusing side. The player's aircraft, enemies, and backgrounds all seem fairly serious, for the most part, but then the character art and voice clips seem to be pure parody. On the one hand, I really like the backgrounds, units, and bosses. They all look excellent. There's a ton of intricate smooth animation, and everything pops in that sort of regard. It's also pretty cool that Player 1 pilots a P-51 Mustang, while Player 2 flies a P-47 Thunderbolt. Neat. Perhaps this is a nod to NMK's USAAF Mustang and P-47 the Phantom Fighter, both of which were side-scrollers rather than vertical shooters. That aside, I'm not especially crazy about the character art here. That, along with the text and the explosions, does further lend itself to being a parody shooter, which is in stark contrast to the rest of the serious main graphics. This is further supported by the goofy voice clips mid-game. They're silly and fun, but maybe don't properly match what's going on screen. The bomber collection and deployment clip is also puzzling. What the heck is the pilot saying when he picks up and deploys a bomber? It's a little on the irritating side of things if I can be perfectly frank. While I'm on the topic, why have two totally different planes and not include different voice clips for each pilot? Especially since at the title screen and intermissions, the two pilots are established as very different people. Maybe I'm being a little overcritical, but I don't know, it seems like that small touch could have made a real difference with the presentation, especially in a co-op game. I think it would anyway. Also of note, and something I'm a little more hyper-aware of, is the short, super repetitive generic rock riffs that make up ZIng Zing Zip's BGM. I know many other games of its time had significantly better, often iconic BGM, but ZIng Zing Zip feels canned and stale.
Oh yeah! Oh my god! Let's go! Jelly bean? Come on, Jelly!
On the ACA side of things, all of the easy-to-follow menus, tweaks, and adjustments regarding the game are once again present here. You can change the title screen, switch to the Player 2 ship, activate Tate rotation, and various filters, and so forth. You know, the ACA standard. There's not a ton more to say, I think, so let's get to my final thoughts.
Oh yeah! Come on, Jelly bean! Jelly bean? Come on, Jelly bean! Come on, Jelly bean!
So is ZIng Zing Zip any fun? Well, from a gameplay standpoint, it really is nothing we haven't seen before. It's basically Raiden with a whiff of 1943. The controls are responsive on the Switch at least, so input delay isn't a huge issue here, but the roll requires a bit too much space to be used to its fullest potential. It's serviceable, and if you haven't played the many games like it, its graphical style and slapstick voice clips might appeal to a lot of players. But for me, I'm not really on board. The enemies and backgrounds are actually pretty cool, but the character design, some of the voice clips, and the very short, almost generic music loops don't resonate with me at all. For me, it crosses into boring territory. Whether it was $8 well spent though, well, having played several other ACA titles that do what ZIng Zing Zip does but better, maybe not so much for me. Still, I'd say it's probably worth a credit feed or two to see all the sights in the game, so long as you haven't extensively played Raiden or Kyoku Tiger or Fire Shark or the like. We all know that the ACA line gets a new entry every week, but what if a shmup doesn't land? Well, I have an idea for that, which includes but is not limited to small listicles of ACA titles past. There are a huge amount of them that we haven't even scratched on Bullet Heaven after all. We also recently took delivery of Raiden 3 Cross Mikado Maniacs, Trouble Witch's Final, and Yuru Kill for PlayStation 4. Which of these would you like to see covered next? Let me know below.